The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
You doing that thing you do, breaking my heart into a million pieces, like you always do. And you don't mean to be cruel. You never even knew about the heartache I've been going through. Well, I try to forget you, girl, but it's just so hard to do. Every time you do that thing you do,
And welcome to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction sometimes is reality. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. X-Zone Nation, my first guest tonight is Richard Alther, and we're going to be talking to Richard about his new book that is out. And let me tell you a little bit about Richard first. Let me see. Richard Alther was raised as a Lutheran German American in a small New York City suburb, rife with anti-Semitism. After graduating as an English major from Cornell University, he pursued twin careers as a writer and painter. Fueled by his ongoing search into the roots of Nazism, he studied German and Jewish history, folklore, and culture. Now, Siegfried Follies approaches the aftermath and legacy of the Holocaust from a perspective co-equally Gentile and Jewish. This is his second novel. Richard has been an exhilarating painter for many years. In addition, he trains and competes nationally as a masters swimmer. He currently lives in Vermont and California and joins us today from the Mojave Desert. Richard Alther, welcome to the X-Zone.
Thank you, Rob. Nice to be with you today.
You must find it very strange going from Vermont to the Mojave Desert.
Well, it's like the birds, north and south.
Mm-hmm.
I think I came to a point when I had enough of the Yukon and Vermont winter, and I'm happy to be spending some time here in the sun area.
Well, we're happy that you're able.
Loving it.
Well, we're happy that you're able to join us tonight here on the X-Zone, sir. And now, Richard, you were raised as a German Lutheran, and you're writing about Jews in the Holocaust. How so?
Well, when I was young, 5, 6, 7 years old, it was the ashes had barely settled from World War II.
Yeah.
And Hitler was just a huge factor in these days. Still is. But for me as a child, he was just larger than life, evil incarnate, to hear all of the adults talk about him. But he was also fascinating because, he burned people alive in ovens, and so did the Wicked Witch and Hansel and Gretel. And, you were just saying about blurring fact and fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Rob, that as a child, at least growing up in the New York area, where your face confronting every ethnic type and nationality. Children have very plastic minds, and their imaginations are running wild. I think that's true for your listeners who are interested in the psychic and paranormal, which I think is wonderful and actually childlike. I mean, kids believe in Santa going across the sky and going up and down chimneys.
Yeah.
So as a child, here was Hitler, who was a monster, the mother of all monsters. But it's complicated because, on the other hand, there was something bad about the Jews. I mean, they were put to death, and I didn't understand this as a kid, but it blurred, the fantasy of storybook telling, the grim tales, if you will, and something happening right in our own lifetime.
Richard, you and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break. Please stand by, and thank you once again for joining us.
Sure,
Exonation, Richard Alther is our very special guest this hour. His website, www.siegfriedfollies.com. That's siegfriedfollies.com. We'll be back on the other side of this 2-minute commercial break. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away.
Smiled at me. I felt the heat that enveloped me, and what I saw I liked to see. I never knew where evil grew. I should have steered away from you. My friend told me to keep clear of you, but something drew.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. My very special guest this hour is Richard Alther. We're talking about Siegfried Follies, or Follies, www.siegfriedfollies.com. Sorry we had to cut off to a commercial break there, Richard, but you and I were talking about, here you are, a German Lutheran, and yet you're talking about Jews in the Holocaust. And I said, how so? And you were telling me, and I had to cut you off, and I apologize for that.
Okay. That's okay. We were saying how complicated, confusing it is for children to try to juggle as they're learning about all these different elements. And before we calcify as adults, there's all black and white. You're a Jew, you're a Muslim, you're an Italian. Children go all over the place. Well, which is wonderful, but I did get seized with this subject early on. Recently, however, a friend of mine was writing a book based on DNA research, and in this field there are 7 haplogroups. Only one of these haplogroups contains all the Semitic population. Well, here I am, a WASP, and so forth, in my whole background. And it turns out that all of my patrilineal heritage is in the one haplogroup that contains the Semitic populations. So this was a great laugh because, a lot of people think I'm Jewish. And they, my brother, who's was a retired history professor, he could have been a Borscht Belt comedian. I mean, he was like, Maury Amsterdam, and still is. So when we say you have this label, I have that label, DNA research is sort of fascinating because it explodes all of that myth. We are all from the same melting pot.
Why do we put labels on each other?
Well, I think it helps us survive. I mean, it goes back to the recorded history that you have one tribe here and another tribe there, and it's a question of real estate and survival and land ownership, I think, more than religion. Religion gets sort of labeled on the people across the river speak a different tongue and have a different faith, but I think it's really a survival mechanism. Of course, today, in this world, it's obsolete. But I would go on to say that I feel it was a gift growing up in the New York metropolitan area because it was such a patchwork quilt. In your face was every racial and ethnic type in the world, whereas like folks who are in the country for good and other reasons are cushioned.
Yes.
They're cocooned. So I caught on early to what is it about Jews? Why were they slaughtered on such a mass scale? Well, the fact is that my mother, who was a loud, wonderful Irish Catholic from Flatbush, Brooklyn, she'd call herself and her family the Shanty Irish, she was steeped in anti-Semitism. Why? In Brooklyn, the Jews were the shopkeepers. They were the landlords. They had more disposable income and power. So there's a label, people who had more, and that was deep in my background as a boy. My mother, who couldn't stand the Jews, and nor could any of the Christians in this area. In fact, as the squeaky clean vanilla suburb got infiltrated by Italians and Jews and other folks 20 miles away in New York City, a synagogue was built, and soon after the rocks smashed all the windows. And so there's a part of my background that, has just always stayed fascinated with what is it about these people that created such venom against them. And when I got to college, my class at Cornell, the arts college, was half Jewish, and they were the brilliant ones in my class, and they were from sophisticated suburbs outside of Chicago and New York. And it was evident soon with these friends that their families valued education and learning very highly, as opposed to my all-American, sports-minded high school. So they weren't smarter, but they were intimidating and they were captivating, and it went further for me in history, learning that in the 20th century. The level of carnage and barbarity from World War II. I mean, it was just unbelievable. It's just a subject that I couldn't shake.
I was raised in the melting pot of Montreal, Park Extension. And then we moved to Chamonix-Laval, another melting part of Montreal. Well, actually, it was off the island of Montreal on the island of Laval. My best friends growing up were Eddie Chad, Howie Tesler. We learned, and you know what? I thank my parents so much, because I was fortunate enough at a very early age to be indoctrinated into all these different cultures, where you went fishing at Noyon, which was an area off of Lake Champlain. You'd catch sunfish, perch, and you'd bring them home and give them to Mama Tatina, who lived just down the apartment downstairs on Wiseman. And she would cook up this feast of wonderful fish that everyone would enjoy. So that was the Italian, and then we went to school with the Greek Orthodox. We went to school with the Irish, with the French Canadians, and you know what? We learned about each other, and it was great. And when I look around the world today and see so much hate and so much disdain for people that we give labels to, it just boggles my mind, because this is not how we were raised, and people are people.
Well, and you spoke two languages, I assume.
Yes, I did,
French
yes.
And English, that in addition to all the rest that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, I think, there's so much fascination and compelling literature still being written, books, movies, plays, all of this about Nazis and Hitler. I think, first of all, it's genocide, which is still going on as we're speaking right now. We don't, in the non-oil-rich nations like in Africa, I mean, there's slaughter going on constantly between Muslims and Christians. But I think also, Rob, that we all feel somewhat culpable in this business, that we've had invisible ingredients in our backgrounds that are in the bone marrow, very hard to shake. And it leads me to mention about the German nation today. Right now, opened in Berlin an exhibit the first ever about Hitler, and it's not his uniform that would be incendiary, but his face on dish towels and souvenirs. How the ordinary German people, embraced him and as their leader. And just last week in the Wall Street Journal, there was an 880-page report issued by the German government about the diplomats in the Third Reich, their absolute inclusion in the Holocaust. It wasn't just this one madman, but they actually quote one diplomat's expense report saying, and I quote, liquidation of Jews in Belgrade discussed in talks with Hungarian envoys in Budapest. I mean, there was a whole involvement, I'm saying, in the German culture after World War I and the dissolution of the German spirit that was so ripe for a charismatic leader and revival. So that, this just doesn't go away because we say, oh, that's just Hitler, that's just this one maniac, when in some ways we're still so involved in this. As I say, the slaughter all over the world still going on in the name of doing away with the other. So
why do you, like you and I were talking briefly during the last commercial break that there was a special on television last week or the week before that was on the Holocaust. And my wife looked over to me and she said, Robbie, how could anyone ever deny that the Holocaust did not happen? And yet there are people in this world today who say the Holocaust never happened. It's
well, the Ahmadinejad, the leader of Iran, and who's about to get nuclear weapons. With all the evidence notwithstanding, I think that our human history says that we are most comfortable in going through life identifying with a very clearly defined label, be it an ethnicity or a religion. And this is really, really hard to shake. I think people like you from Montreal and me from New York, we are some of the privileged folks who, like anybody living in London today, you go on the underground subway and you see every skin color under the rainbow. But most people are isolated demographically, and most people are poor. And this label that you mentioned, it's just so essential as a convenient way to get through the misery of life.
I'd like to share something with you. My next door neighbor, where I live, they're a Muslim family. We moved into our home. I didn't know this gentleman from Adam and his family, and yet over the years that we've been at our new house, we've become friends. And in fact, when his wife, who does all the traditional baking and cooking from their homeland, makes their home bread, we'll get a knock at the door, and there is my neighbor with a big smile on his face, who he doesn't speak very much English. If he knows 20 words, that's a lot. But he puts forward a plate with his homemade bread saying, "For you, friend."
Rob, here we are in the 21st century, and the popes and bishops of the Catholic Church are still going around, in medieval ermine capes and, golf ball-sized rings. They're arrogant and power-crazed, as Cleopatra. This is the contemporary world. I don't think most Catholics in the world believe in the strictures that the Pope preaches about birth control and these things. People are living lives. So here, even in today's world, we still have, and I do put the blame of Christian demagoguery at the root of anti-Semitism.
Hey, I hate to do this again, but I've got to take my news break. We're coming down in 10 seconds. Please stand by, Richard. Richard Alther's our special guest, www.siegfriedfollies.com. We'll be back. Don't go away.
Hi, this is Ken Elliott. When I'm floating around the universe, I always try to tune in to Rob McConnell.
Hi ho there, Trinity Frog on Sesame Street. When I want to find out what's going on with UFOs or ghosts, I listen to the X Zone with Rob McConnell.
This is Les Corrigan from Target Internet Development. You're listening to Rob McConnell on the X Zone Radio Show.
This is John Hogue, prophecy scholar, and you're listening to Rob McConnell in the X Zone.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Buried deep beneath the stone, and the valley people swore they'd have it for their very own. Go ahead and hate your neighbor, go ahead and cheat a friend. Do it in the name of heaven, you can justify it in the end. There won't be any trumpets blowing come the judgment day on the bloody morning after. One tin soldier rides away.
Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. www.xzoneradiotv.com is our website. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. Richard Alther is our special guest, www.siegfriedfollies.com. And Richard, I'd like to ask you a question at this point. What experiences have you had with Jews that gave you such insight? What provoked you?
Well, you know, when I was a kid in a very Christian town, I learned that there was one of my pals was Jewish, and
right.
His father was a surgeon, and he had a Cadillac, the only swimming pool in town, and his family was looked down upon by my quote ordinary relatives. I mean, these Jews in town, why were they so superior? That stabbed me, and by the time I got into college, I started putting more things together. It's certainly history. I was saying before that the Church, the Holy Roman Church, was the real instigator of anti-Semitism in this case, preaching intolerance from the get-go. And I've thought that, here are the Christians projecting onto Jews their own superiority complex. I mean, here are the Jews acting holier than thou. How dare they? There's only one Catholic Church, and here the Jews are heathens. They have different rituals and laws, the same God, but no. I think that one group helps identify and clarify and unify itself by proselytizing against the other. It reinforces things. Let me quote Fidel Castro just last week.
Sure, go ahead.
He said that Jews have lived in existence much harder than ours, meaning the Cubans. He said, and I quote, "Nothing compares to the Holocaust." And, that got me thinking also, the Jews never really had a homeland. I mean, when you think how big
That's
Germany
right.
is and France, they were always the outsiders. And here's a major factor, Rob. It was very unchristian to charge interest and do any. You remember the phrase "filthy lucre"?
Sure do.
Jews 1,000 years ago took on the role as civilization was getting going for being the money handlers, the money lenders. So they were both despised for this and yet counted on. Now take it 1,000 years forward, and you come to the World War II. And Jews ran all the banks. The Rothschilds, they were the people in power, and that was extremely threatening, and also making, again, a black and white issue for the downtrodden Christian Germans. Another way that the Jews have somehow been marginalized.
But tell me this, Richard. What was so wrong with that?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about the violence in human nature, in human society. I mean, Rob, 2,000 years ago, the Christians were thrown to the lions by the Romans, for fun. Yeah. And there were the gladiators. Well, let me just last week, I heard NFL retired players interviewed on NPR here.
Mm-hmm.
And they are suffering concussions and early stages of dementia, and Alzheimer's. And they said, they'd do it again. They would do it again, because violence sells. And that resonated with me. I mean, this is the story of humanity. Violence has almost been permitted and expected, so that here, the Holocaust happened on such a large scale. But again, I believe that it's a very, very hard phenomenon to get under control.
Yes, but Richard, if you'll excuse me for cutting in, when we look at the love movement of the 60s, we also know that love sells more than hate does.
Ostensibly. I mean, but look at, yes, that's true. But on the other hand, look at the stampedes at soccer matches all around the world. People often trampled to death. We have these, I think we have very basic natures in all of us, some evil and some capacity for torture and violence. And yet we have at war with, fortunately, usually won by, our civilizing humanitarian instincts. We were saying before that those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to juggle all points of view, this is education. This is civilization. I mean, most of the world just is not in an economic state to learn about the other and to cross-pollinate ideas. But I do want to mention an idea of hope.
Okay.
And it has to do with Kansas, right in the middle of America. Leading up to this last election, Rob, there was this former senator, Sam Brownback, who was a very polarizing, extremely conservative senator. He was running for governor, and in the Republican primary, he defeated the other leading Republican, who, I quote, argued that every law be rooted in the Bible and the Constitution. Well, this character did not win. And even in Kansas, where Fred God Hates Fags Phelps preaches, all of that white supremacy and anti-gay stuff, the voice of reason still comes to the fore in a state as polarized as Kansas. And I think that is an interesting message. And also in my California here, look at all the powerful women. Carly Fiorina and Meg Whitman on the right, and then Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. These are tough broads. These are women who are bringing, and Nancy Pelosi above all, a huge measure of power. Meanwhile, you have that love feathery soft guy Jerry Brown that you're talking about from the 60s. And even Arnold, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's kind of a girly man. He brings people together. So I think that I think that if more women ran the world, it would help bring things into better balance.
I could not agree with you more, and history proves you right.
Bring back Golda Meir. Remember Golda running Israel?
I assure
there
you,
you go.
she did not take anyone's crap. Like I'll tell you something. When you look at history, you've got Mary, Queen of Scots, Queen Victoria, and I'm a proud Canadian, so we've got Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. You've got Margaret Thatcher. You've got Kim MacDonald. Wait a minute, hold on. That was the thorn in the thumb of the Canadian government. All right, we're going to forget her for a few minutes here. But when you look at the overall picture, the women who have ruled have done a hell of a better job than the guys who have ruled.
Well, I think that they embody the opposites in themselves. Their wives, mothers, women, females, from the earth, and I think fear of women's power, innate indigenous authority, explains so much of the violence at the hand of men who have to do resort to the sword. They instead of just planting seeds and shutting up more.
Is it that they have to resort to the sword, or that they feel it's the macho thing to do?
Well, I think that's one and the same. I mean, it's throughout human history. We have men in charge. Yeah. And in our contemporary world, all over the world now, in India and England, everywhere, we're seeing modern women whose hands are on the helm. And this has got to be, no matter whether they're, castrating women, as Hillary Clinton is called, the fact is, she's also a mother and will be a grandmother, and she is embodying, she's a balancing act. She almost got elected president.
I remember my mother saying behind every successful man is a woman, and then she would go down history and tell me, like Martha Washington and blah, 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 blah. You know what? And all these years later, I remember calling my mom up and saying, you know what, Mom, you're right. And, my wife didn't tell me to say that either. But she's
I'm an
right.
optimist because I think that, when the crazies are given voice, like Fred Phelps, you know about this man, the preacher who, God hates fags at Matthew chapters. Now, in front of the Supreme Court, right now, the Supreme Court in the U.S. is deciding his right to free speech in picketing the funeral of a straight man, a Marine, because the U.S. government and the U.S. Army sanctions homosexuality. So, he is a Bible literalist. I think, honestly, I'm a Pollyanna at heart. I think it's good. Lance this boil, get it out there. Let all the reasonable people of the world see what a jerk this man is and how potentially dangerous somebody like that, or the lunatic in Florida that was going to burn the Korans.
Oh, this guy deserved to get his...
Get it out there.
Exactly.
Lance it. Get it out.
Yeah. You know what? There's so much hate in this world today that we need to, for once and for all, say, all right, let's get it all out on the table. What gives, where, and why do we hate? Let's get rid of it for once and for all, because you know what? We're all on this planet together. We're not going to go anywhere. And people think that animals are at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to... who should run this planet. But I look at it the other way around. I see humans at the bottom of the totem pole because animals don't cause wars. They don't create nuclear weapons. They work together, and we could learn a lot from animals.
Well, we do. We do, and people adore pets and learn from them. Every generation ideally has its Gandhi or Martin Luther King. I mean, there does arise, fortunately, a pacifist, a person who is so compelling that, Abraham Lincoln, arises, helps people who aren't as sophisticated and educated rise above what you're talking about. And, of course, we have to believe that that's possible. Otherwise, we'd all just commit hara-kiri.
I believe it is. Really. I believe it is possible, but there are those in this world who gain by having this hatred fueled.
Well, look at the Ayatollah in Iran. A millennia ago, it was swords and cannons or something. Yeah. It's scary because I think that Iran is capable of self-immolating and saying, okay, we're going to do the ultimate suicide bomber here, destroy Israel, knowing that within minutes we would be annihilated as well, but all for the glory of Allah. And that is so scary that I even am optimistic enough, I have to say, that the world is looking at Ahmadinejad and actually the Muslim clerics, who sanctioned him, and North Korea as odd men out. I think that the momentum of humanity is got to go in the right direction, and with connected by the internet and all else, hopefully, we can make friends with everybody, whatever their skin color or religion.
We have to get past skin color. We have to get past philosophies. We have to get past religions. We have to get past folklore, myth, and legends. We have to get to the root of the person, and that's their heart, their desires.
I have to get a little. My book. I created a tale, a fairy tale, 8-year-old Germans, one a Hitler Youth, blonde, blue-eyed, total
Right.
orphan in the bomb ruins, and he saves a child thrown from a train who he doesn't know it is, of course, Jewish and on his way to an extermination camp. And my story follows these boys for 30 years. They become brothers. They have a difficult life. They're both damaged by what they've witnessed in the Holocaust, but they are really all they have in the world. They have no family. And they bond through thick and thin, and it sort of puts in place the secondary superficial things like skin color and tongue and ethnicity and all of that. They are forced to realize, as different natures that they have, that this is what gives meaning to their life, taking care of each other.
You and I have to take our final break. Please stand by, Richard. Exonation, our guest this hour is Richard Alther, A-L-T-H-E-R. His website is siegfriedfollies.com. That's Richard Alther. His website is www.siegfriedfollies.com. Richard and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues. We're right here from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and X Zone TV. Whatever you do, X Zone Nation, don't go away, because you know what? We're going to be back. Here we go. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
The road is long, with a many winding tongue that leads us to who knows where, who knows where. But I'm strong.
Exonation, Richard Alther is our special guest this hour, www.siegfriedfollies.com. First of all, Richard, thank you very much for joining us tonight here on the X Zone. What would you like to leave the X Zone Nation with tonight?
Well, we've been talking about intolerance of others and prejudice and so forth. There's a lot of validity here, because let's just say the Mediterranean people of different tongues and backgrounds, they're all frolicking in the sun, the Spanish, the Italians, and there the Swedes are freezing to death up there. There is validity to a lot of cultural and ethnic stereotype. I mean, food, ecology, all kinds of things come to bear. And we've been talking about digging underneath that. And because it's such a ready cause for mistrust,
Yes, it is, yeah.
dislike, and then out and out hatred. I was just reading the other week about a new study of centenarians. How did you live to be 100? They've asked all these people. One guy, I don't know, Jewish guy in New York would say, well, it was pastrami on rye. And another lady, in Ohio would say, well, it's my needlework group. And somebody else would say, cocktail 6:30 every night without fail. And
Here,
the
I'll
next
drink to
person
that, yeah.
abstaining, But they all had in common, Rob, they live and let live. They shrugged off what they should have done, could have done. They see they've done this all their lives. They laugh, and it was just a wonderful message that we could aspire. We hopefully don't have to live to 100 to do that, but across all borders, this seems to be a common thread. And for me personally, with my interest in anti-Semitism as a non-Jew, you don't need to put down others. You don't need to slander others in order to boost yourself and feel good about yourself. You can just find what's in your core. That is the answer, and not having to identify yourself by your own ironclad rules of the tribe versus somebody else's. That's sort of where I come out for now.
You know, you talk about tribes and you talk about rules, and here we're coming into the Christmas season, and as we get closer to December the 25th, people change. They have a lot more love in their heart. They have a lot more compassion. Can you just imagine if we could bottle that Christmas goodwill and have Christmas 365 days of the year? What a great world this would be.
Well, each culture tries to.
Yeah.
I mean, with a little Thanksgiving, bringing everybody together, including orphans off the street, and whether it's Easter or different holidays, since the pagans, there's always been ritual that tries to continuously intersect and get that spirit across. It would be great.
And I'm sure with people like you, Richard, getting the message out there, we will succeed in time. So I want to thank you very much for joining us, Richard. Take care of yourself, and I look forward to the next time you join us here in the X Zone.
Thank you, Rob, very much. All best to you and your listeners.
To you too, my new friend. X Zone Nation, Richard Alther has been my guest this hour. SiegfriedFollies.com. That's www.siegfriedfollies.com. I'll be back on the other side of the news at 6.5 minutes past as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.